yeah, and so that's sort of how on this topic and how we ended up with the panelists we have. So let me introduce our panelists then, and then I'm sure they'll come out and join me on stage, hopefully. So we have Lynn Summerfield. Lynn is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Building. Lynn started her career as a site engineer and spent the first 18 years working as a main contractor on major projects across the UK. Lynn joined British Land as a project director within the development team in 2017. And since joining British Land, Lynn has led the development of a number of new build and refurbishment commercial office spaces in central London, and Lynn is currently leading the delivery of the pre-construction phase of a large-scale commercial project. Secondly, we have Dan Grusser. Dan, oh, everyone's name's up there, that's helpful. Dan is a facade specialist at Turner, Townsend, and Townsend Alenia, with over 15 years experience across consultancy, contracting, and delivery. He contributes to facade cost planning, value engineering, and PCSA setup, helping to de-risk projects and support stakeholders in certainty throughout the REBA stages. We have Will Bradshaw. Will is the technical chair of the Specialist Access Engineering and Maintenance Association, or SEMA, as some of you may be familiar with it, and is a chartered engineer with the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. He works as a technical sales manager for Facade Access Solutions as part of the Alimac Group, collaborating closely with the Cox Gomel, Mantec, and Tractel brands, which together have over 120 years experience in the facade access industry. And our final panelist member is Sean Murphy. Sean is the head of facade access at WSP, and he is an industry-trained professional specializing in bespoke access from concept design through to final commissioning. Sean has delivered many landmark projects in his career spanning 36 years and has been instrumental in raising the standards for end-user training. 10 years ago, Sean swapped contracting for consulting, bringing much-needed experience from the industry to the consulting world. So, without any delay. You can sit near me or far from me. I'll try not to spit too much. So. Yeah, so thank you very much for joining me here on stage. I'll also join you in the seat. I've got myself some questions. Yeah, so considering how we arrived at this topic and the need and the drive for roof space, or the conflict there, I thought we'd start our first question to Lynn on the client side. I thought it'd be interesting to know if, from your experience, if these constraints on the roof space are sort of, well, if you're experiencing them too, I guess, for one, and if there's more to it than just sort of the need to meet sustainable targets or things.
There's massive demand on the roof space. Everyone wants a bit of roof space. I'd say one of the main challenges we have is that people want amenity space on the roof. So then you're not just dealing with plants, photovoltaics and access equipment, but you're also dealing with having a lovely terrace up there as well for people. And those things is a bit of a push-pull there. So we find that on our new developments, that's really important, but we're doing quite a lot of work now on existing asset stock where we're putting amenity space on the roof, and that's meaning we're having to move things around to make that work. So yeah, there's a sort of, for us, amenity space is income. So if we can create amenity space on the roof, that's really helpful for making projects viable.
Right. And I guess that has knock-on costs then for the maintenance. I don't know if there's a thought on how that gets planned into things then.
Well, we have to juggle all of those things. So we can't just consider the demands of wanting to put amenity space up there. We obviously have to consider all of the things. But what we're trying to do at the moment, and probably most people are experiencing this, is we're putting BMUs up on roofs, but making them sort of look nicer.
Paint them
and
green, right, and add some plants.
hide them, or at the project I'm looking at the moment, particularly, it's thinking about how can we, and they're doing this on lots of projects, but how can you make sure that the tracks actually don't mean you've lost space? So covering over the tracks, but then you have this challenge that when you want to use the BMU, you've got to lift all the covers out to get to the track. So there's lots of things that can be done, but I think we can't hide from the fact that that amenity space pull is a real one, and it's a challenge we're all going to have to accommodate as well.
It's becoming more common.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, Will, how do you? I guess you're seeing it on the technical side a lot. You encountering this as well, and
yeah, there's a general trend to omit the BMU and go with rope access from what we see. And yeah, the main reason is the amenity space that's required on terraces and at roof level. Yeah, I mean, they generally tend. Well, I normally get on board at tender stage, at stage 4, so there's a facade access strategy being created by your consultant, your Sean's of this world. So the decision as to whether it's going to be rope access or BMU has been made by that point, but sometimes I might get a BMU access strategy and the main contractor at that point decides, oh, we're going to value engineer it out and we're going to go for rope access. But at that point, have they considered the knock-on effect and the life cycle costs of that decision? So, for example, have they considered that you need to strengthen the facade, the balustrade, the parapet for the increased rope access loads and the cost increase associated with that? Have they considered the cost saving that you could have with a BMU of a glass replacement facility rather than having to get a mobile crane in and a road closure? Or have they also considered that there might be a need for other people to access the facade that aren't cleaning the facade? There are other specialists, like for your facade inspection, that might not necessarily be rope access trained. How are they going to get there? Things like that.
Yeah. Well, Dan, I guess that kind of leads into your specialty, right? The cost considerations. How do we consider those? Are those considered in your experience?
Does my mic work?
I'm sure if you start talking,
cool.
it will. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from a QS perspective, I mean, if I maybe go one step back, I mean, who is your client? You know, the clients who tend to sell the building after it has been completed. So, do they tend to look at more capital cost? And there are clients who want to keep the building in their portfolio. They are keen on the life cycle cost. So, you know, that's key. And so, I mean, when we price, you know, access equipments, we base it on, for instance, your documents. But we need to, you know, have the view of the client also. That their view will be also be taken into account. So I guess it's a blend of what is you know, safe and conforms with all regulations, together with the clients. You know, what is their interest, right? And then, say, you know, you've got a mid-high-rise building. Maybe the one client who's willing to sell it off straight away, probably they're more interested in the abseiling, less capital cost. And the client with the long-term view, they might favour a BMU, which they think might be cheaper in the end because they thought it through, you know, providing glass is replaced from the outside, providing the BMU is maintained. And then each you know, system has a knock-off effect. BMUs, the loads are being applied to vertical fins. Abseiling, they've got significant loads on horizontal fins, on copings, and that's the cost that goes on to the facade contractor. So, but I mean, I'm simplifying a lot here, but it seems that first the system, the type of maintenance unit is being chosen. Then you look into the structural impacts onto the facade. And luckily, I work on projects that lead into PCSAs. So before we hand it over to the main contractor, we do a pre-bid. So, and I'm keen to capture those strengthening items in the pricing document. So commercially, it's tracked and designed out designed during the PCSA. Sorry, that was from the start to the end kind of thing, but and very simplified. But that's kind of a my take on as a working at a QS.
And then British Land, they do they mostly take on, they don't sell on the buildings, as I understand. Is that right? So then that presumably feeds into the decision making.
So we build and run our assets. So we hold on to our buildings and do the property management on them.
And how does that inform your
Well,
direction in terms
I
of
mean,
access?
to be honest, it shouldn't change the way you approach these things, should it, really? You should be
Ideally
designing
not,
it
I
in the right
suppose.
way. But
The safest option
but
first.
obviously, we're totally invested in that because we're going to be running the building. And we need to make sure we can maintain it. And particularly in my role, we don't just do the delivery of the construction side of things. We're also, we don't lose a building once it's finished. It's still ours. So any issues we have post-completion are still our problems. So we're much more invested then in making sure, in my role, that we're building and dealing with those things during the design phase. But I think having consistency of people, someone said it earlier, if you've got consistent resources that stay and live with a job all the way through, it makes it much easier to make sure people are doing the right thing because they're invested in, for their own sake, you want it to be right, don't you? Because you're going to be living with it.
Any thoughts on that one from the rest of the panelists?
Yeah, well, in terms of getting in on board early, of course, I think with everything that's gone before, with Sylvia and with the guys from Clearline, it's evident that we need to have these considered systems going forward in the longer term. And, we've seen, certainly, I think, it comes across today that we've all seen there's been a shift. So we need to try and restore that appetite for having the systems. There's absolutely agree. We've got competing priorities in terms of roof space. But of course, this is what planning is all about, isn't it? And this is, we can't simply allocate that roof space to one thing or another. It has to be a shared space. We have to make it work. In that respect, it's just, it's really important that we get on board early, stage 2, minimally, have those conversations early, ensure that the need for the facade access is embedded in a design and becomes essentially a design parameter, because too often it's an add-on. We certainly don't want to be in a situation, and we've seen this. I mean, I've seen this myself in recent years, where we're kind of getting squeezed out and marginalised. And just to be clear, if I talk about we, I say this because, of course, I was a contractor for much longer than I was a consultant. So I do obviously come from that perspective, and I absolutely understand the benefit of having a solid, usable, serviceable facade access system going forward for the upkeep of the building in the longer term. And that can be quite a difficult sell, particularly if it's a developer who's not really necessarily considering the longer term. But certainly, yeah, it's certainly there's some challenges there.
Yeah. And how do you sell that to the client then, the more expensive upfront capital? I don't know if open to anyone who wants to answer that, but that's when I was working in consultancy, that was certainly a complex part of it. You might have a perfectly good design, but you have to now sell it to someone to pay for it, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily an easy sell. I mean, obviously, we've come, you find yourself coming at it from different directions. I mean, Sylvia made the point earlier about, we can just bash someone over the head with legislation, but we don't really want to do that. You want to, there needs to be a benefit if you want to convince, a client to invest more into a solution. There needs to be a benefit at the end of that. We need to be able to sell those benefits. So, for instance, in terms of a BMU system, for argument's sake, of course, I can I can refer to examples where we have BMU systems that I was involved in installing right back to the late 90s, late 80s, early 90s, 30 plus years. And those systems are still, One Canada Square is probably a good example. That's the original from 1991. That's the original system, 2 machines. I don't think anyone can argue that building isn't well maintained. It's been well maintained using the same equipment for nearly 35 years. So that's the payoff. It's being able to sell that to a developer who maybe is just looking at the short-term cost. And the Clearline guys, I think, made a really good point because, and I will catch up with these guys as well, because it's been a bugbear of ours, is we do get involved with systems where, for example, if you haven't got a viable glass replacement strategy, and we've been involved in projects where they haven't got viable glass replacement strategies, these are new projects. And the understanding is that whatever it costs ultimately will be divided up amongst the tenants as part of a service agreement. And I always find that quite interesting how that actually plays out in real time. If you've got to bring in a 200-ton crane, for instance, to lift a glazed unit up 150 metres, how does that actually play out in terms of, that's probably, could be £5,000 worth of glass and, £50,000 worth of replacement. When that's ultimately divided up, that appears on your service cost at the end of the year. There's a lot of that happening, of course, particularly in high-end residentials. So,
can I just add to the point on how you could sell it? I think one thing you've got to think about is not just the cost. If you can incorporate BMUs, for example, if you can incorporate them in the roof in such a way that you still enable space that can be used, that space that can be used, there's an income. So I think it's thinking a bit differently about what cost is. So for us, we might be prepared to spend a bit more money if we can show that we can gain some area. So if we could do something a little bit differently with a BMU and create some area on the roof, that would be income, and it would easily cancel out the cost of the actual BMU. So I think it's thinking less linearly about, if that's a word, about cost. And we've been talking about this recently. We've got a BMU, we've got these panels that go over the track so that we can use the space. But we've been having a conversation that, how do you do that so that if you actually do need to get to the BMU, that you don't have to spend a whole day lifting all the individual panels out? Because if you do them in a finish that looks lovely, they weigh more, and then they've got to be smaller, and then it takes longer to lift out. So there's all of these things that I think if we could solve some of those challenges, it would be a much easier sell.
We've done a hydraulically lifted panel before, but obviously that costs a lot of money.
Yeah,
so,
we're looking at that.
Yeah, we've got a solution I can show you some pictures of. But
Technical, but expensive solution.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, on projects that we're working currently in the city, towers typically have a BMU, and I think it's quite cost efficient to have the greenery and have your tracks run through. I think that's not really too complicated, and covering the tracks from a cost point of view, that's it's a drop in the ocean, isn't it?
We do a trackless machine as well, depending on the requirements. If the glass lifting's not too much and the outreach isn't too great, you can have a trackless machine which is guided around on a rail that can be incorporated into plant beds and things like that we've done in the past. So when the machine's actually not there and parked away, it's really inconspicuous that that's a guide rail. So there are ways of integrating it into the roof area.
So if I can pick up on Lynn's point, I've got some crib notes because I'm terrible at remembering stuff. So if you don't mind, I'll do any prompts. It's okay. All right. So just picking up what I said is, again, early stage engagement, making the facade access a key driver in terms of the design. Early engagement with specialists, like with whether it's a specialist consultant. If if you engage with a specialist consultant, the consultants will invariably engage with a specialist contractor. Because as a consultant myself, I'm not looking to reinvent the wheel. We go out to the market and we discuss what can and can't be done. That's not always been the case in consultancy. Sometimes you've seen some crazy schemes which have not necessarily come to fruition. But we're always very keen to make sure that, that the strategy, as much as we can push the boundaries, it needs to be deliverable. The outcome needs to, ultimately needs to be a usable piece of equipment that's safe, and then provides longevity, which is super important. Educate clients in terms of life cycle. Now, again, unfortunately, it does come back to that taking a longer term view on stuff. So, the importance of having a system that is usable, understanding the benefits of that system in the longer term. So that system should be giving you 20 or 30 years. You should be that system should have an ease of use that will facilitate the ability to deliver anyone to the facade, not just a specialist. If you want to do a facade inspection, for instance, or if you want to, an architect wants to come in and do some de-snagging. So these are systems that can be used. Obviously, there's an element of training involved, but these are usable systems. They don't require any particular special training or qualification. So establishing those systems and having that available to you. I mean, I was involved in Centrepoint, for instance, and I mean, Will might be slightly before his time, but we replaced the BMU on Centrepoint. The BMU on Centrepoint was used to do all of the facade inspections, of course, when they had all the problems with the concrete cladding. And we were able to take, and I trained the guys in the use of the equipment, we were able to take 5 or 6 facade experts up there, and they were able to carry out sort of surveying work up there using special equipment and stuff. But that was a facility that wouldn't have been available otherwise. If that, had that been rope access, again, I'm sure there's, we have experts out there who rope access and can carry out such works, but you are, of course, limiting your market. I don't know many architects who rope access. Certainly within our team, we haven't got any facade guys, experts who are rope accessing. Possibly with Arab, I don't know. Certainly when I was at Arab, they certainly didn't have anyone who rope accessing. I'll quickly rattle through these very, very quickly. So there's just this key point. So again, just following on from that early stage engagement. If you have that early stage engagement, we can schedule out the equipment. If it's a tracked piece of equipment, we can schedule it out. If it has a parking requirement, we can schedule it out. It can be looked at early in the process. We can use digital tools to do clash detection. We can look at it in the context of what else we've got on the roof. The need to maintain public spaces, the need to incorporate plant, PV, for instance. Of course, we can, we can work around that. Align with regulatory drivers. So again, it doesn't want to be, we don't want to live by it. We don't want to be shackled by regulatory drivers. But of course, it's important. We need to be, compliant. And of course, better inspection regimes, of course, ties in with safety regulations such as the Building Safety Act. And the last point really is, and I think it's what you were saying, Lynn, is champion the aesthetic. Now, we don't want to compromise usability. Purely, there needs to be this thing sort of form over function. Now, we want it to be both. We want it to have form and function. So again, having that conversation early, take a couple of examples. It's always easier to give examples. One Blackfriars, for instance, which is just the other side, Blackfriars Bridge. those machines, of course, exist within the building. The machine pops out through the top. We have a movable facade element, both at the top and also, I think, 2 machines at level 44, which you don't know they're there. You wouldn't know they're there. Doing a fantastic job probably for the last, I'd say, 6 or 7 years. Similarly at the Shard, of course, famously they've got 15 machines on the Shard, mostly incorporated. The only one you ever really see is the one at the very top. And there's quite a number of examples. 22 Bishopsgate, probably more recently, where you've got all of the you've got multiple BMUs on lift tables, and that ties into the whole fifth elevation thing, which is has been a topic of discussion now, where roofscapes are now almost as important. So so there's a lot that can be done, but it does all come back to having that early stage engagement, getting in with the teams. But what drives it, and I can't emphasise this enough, is really there has to be an appetite to do it from the outset. There has to be an appetite, and at the moment, and not on certainly absolutely not on every project. But I've got 2 towers at the moment we've been working on which have BMU systems, which the main contractor is proposing on those towers that they will go to rope access. And they want us to support them in doing that. And the tallest of the 2 towers is 56 floors. And we just wouldn't entertain that. We couldn't entertain that for reasons that Sylvia explained earlier. It's, we want to work with the teams to develop the right solutions and ones that fit with the building and ideally fit with the budget. But do that early. And I think it gives us half a chance of succeeding.
That brings me to a conversation, Will. I think previously you mentioned that in the US, California and New York specifically, that they have trigger points. I'm not sure the exact heights and things, you know more than I do, where at certain heights they're required to change over from ropes access to a more permanent access strategy like a BMU or something. How does that compare here in the UK, where Sean's talking about 56-story buildings where they're proposing ropes access?
Yeah, so in the UK, obviously working at height is dictated to by the work at height regs and CDM, and that puts a legal precedent onto building owners and designers to prioritise collective means of fall protection, so your BMUs and your MOOPs over personal protective measures, so your rope access and your abseiling. Obviously, that is only reasonably practicable, though. That's governed by being reasonably practical, so it's not specific like it is in the US. So, for example, in California, if a building's over 40 metres in height, you can't rope access the facade. Similar in New York, if it's over 45 metres, you can't rope access the facade. Anything beyond those thresholds has to be accessed either by a powered cradle or BMU. So the law dictates in those areas the equipment that can be used based on the height of the building, which we don't have here. It's only guidance.
Right, so then how does that feed into the conversations at the design table then, for anyone?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult. I'm only on board from stage 4, so I'm only in front of a main contractor when I come on board. So they've already got a facade access strategy, and I'm dealing with a QS that's got a number on a spreadsheet, and he'll go out to 3 to tender, and if it's spec compliant, it will look at the number more times than not. So I'm not involved in those early conversations where I can influence the design, unfortunately. But that's where Sean and facade consultants come in.
And our QS and client presumably can inform those.
Yeah, I mean, we price what we see, what you guys draw up, and I think there are some differences between facade access consultants. You'll be surprised. Some have different views, and some are more relaxed than others. Not too sure. I won't name names, but yeah, I mean, it's simple from our point. What we see, we price, and occasionally, I mean, the projects we work on. Straightforward towers is usually BMU, and when it comes down to the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 story high buildings, that's where is a BMU justified. When the windows are all replaced from the inside, and these are the discussions that we have. And again, it depends on the client. Do they have a long-term view, short-term view? So each project is different, and Yeah.
And when you price what you see, as you say, do you take into account all these extra knock-on effects that I think you raised some and will raise some, and I know Clearline raised some of the knock-on effects of changing, having a ropes access strategy. I think Will or Sean, someone said you need stronger parapets and things. Do those get?
Well, as I said before, once a system is chosen, then you look at what's the knock-on effect on the facade, and I mean, yes, sometimes the cost is just strengthening a coping compared to the facade cost is nothing, but if you have every level, deep horizontal fins, that can be significant cost. Yes, I mean, that will have to be looked at before you even start an early facade procurement. Also, yeah, if it's a significant cost, then you have to go back and compare it to the other options. But most of the time, those additional costs are not that significant, I must say.
I would think, though, it depends on whether you know what they are. Because when we do cost plans, we know a level of information. But until you start doing the detailed design, you may not know all of those things that you need to cost. So it could be that we're not making fully informed decisions early on, because we just can't, until you start developing, getting specialists involved, you're just not probably going to know some of those things. So maybe we just need to think a bit more about doing that.
Right, or get Clearline to tell you the giant numbers for having to bring something onto a neighbouring building.
I was wondering whether there's something actually that could be done a bit more in thinking about using permanent access equipment for doing the actual construction. Because if you could do that, and you could say get rid of a crane a bit earlier off the site, there would be significant value in doing that, and that actually might push the decision.
Yeah, that happens at the minute. So you have beneficial use, it's called. So
Yeah, but it's quite late, isn't it? Beneficial use tends to be quite late in the process, sometimes because maybe you haven't got your oversailing sorted or other things. But I think there's some sort of exercise that could be done there just to look at. I'm just thinking about what I could do on other projects, but I think the value of that could support in some of these decisions.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we did it on a project in Canary Wharf, quite a complicated facade. We were brought on for quite a prolonged beneficial use period, and we designed the machine with a 3-ton glass replacement facility or auxiliary hoist facility, specifically for construction use.
So what did you do with the, what did they use it for? Glazing the facade?
Glazing and infill panels and the like. And then at the end of beneficial use, we then downgraded the GIU to 1 ton, which was the requirement for long-term glass replacement on the project. So we have done it in the past.
So, but could you only do that because you were involved early?
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
Yeah. Normally we're involved. We're on board too late.
Yeah,
I think a common thread involved early. Yeah.
When you have an innovative product, I think early involvement is key, isn't it? I mean, we had a recent project, unfortunately didn't go ahead, but they had a robotic cleaning machine, and as part of the PCSA phase, that supplier came along together with the facade contractors and worked it through. But yeah, got shelved in the end, unfortunately. But I think, if you have something innovative, early engagement is key. And that's how you manage risks.
Yeah, I mean, we do have innovations, but it's quite hard to implement them. For example, we've recently partnered with a company called Skyline Robotics. I think Sylvia shared an image earlier. It's a robotic cleaning arm that can be mounted in existing cradles and new cradles. And as well as that, they have a hyperspectral camera on the facade that's constantly mapping the facade condition whenever the cradle's in use for cleaning, which then reports that back into the BIM model. So the end client has a 3D model of the building, and he can monitor things such as silicon degradation in there. And it's in its infancy currently, but that's something we're trying to promote and get on. But we can only do that if we get on board early. If we're on board too late, we can't promote these innovations. And describe the value. But
I mean, I'm going to change topics very slightly. Well, back to this morning's topics, and I think it relates back to being on board early a bit, and this is open to anyone. With Gateway 2, from the earlier conversation, have you encountered projects where you're now having to formalize the full strategy for the building access to get through Gateway 2 submissions? Because presumably that's all part of our design requirements, I would think.
I have to pass that one. I've not worked on a new build that entailed Gateway 2, so I'll have to pass that one.
Well, certainly on some projects we are getting involved earlier, which is always good. Sort of stage 2, typically. We don't. Again, I suppose a bugbear to some extent is we don't always remain with the project. Not necessarily through lack of trying, but you get sometimes you work in particular contractors, they will dip in and dip out in terms of how much they want to use you. But we haven't. I mean, it hasn't really, certainly hasn't impacted what we've done. It has on some of the bigger projects got us involved a bit earlier and got people thinking about it a bit sooner, which is obviously no bad thing. So that's been that's obviously been
More benefit, yeah?
been an advantage, I think, for all parties in that respect. Just picking up again on well, I make this point a lot in terms of what we were talking about. We were talking about beneficial use and such like. I mean, the key driver, of course, for access is frequency and duration. So, as the guys from Clearline were saying earlier, if they're doing a 30-year replacement of of an array of glass through a shopping centre, you wouldn't necessarily imagine that 30 years ago someone would have decided to install a machine just for it to be there in 30 years' time. So that kind of falls into that category. But then at the same time, as the guys made the point, if they had a premature failure of that glass, and of course premature failure happens, or quite often during the construction phase, then that would have been quite interesting to have expended that amount of money to replace a single unit or a couple of units. But yeah, in terms of our facade access strategy, I mean, the glass replacement is a key element. For centre point, for example, when we replaced the BMU as a contractor, when we replaced the BMU, I remember that very well because we'd done it about 2 weeks before Christmas, and we had a 500-ton crane on Oxford Street, which was mental. And but going forward, of course, when we did replace that BMU, and that BMU had been there since the centre point is probably a 1960s building, I would say, or early 70s maybe at best. So the original BMU was still in situ. So when we replaced that BMU, of course, we upgraded the BMU. We installed the capacity to lift plant. So if you can imagine that operation to get what was actually quite a modest BMU up onto that roof was, we had road closures on Oxford Street, we had bus diversions, we had meetings with all of the traders, of course, permits, crane costs, surveys, backpropping, underground services and such like. But going forwards, having upgraded and installed that facility to allow plant to be lifted with a piece of machinery that was within the realms of the site, clearly was a huge benefit going forward. So these things we can look at, but of course it does take, again, that's an investment. So, I mean, if you're replacing roof plant, you would reasonably expect to be replacing roof plant at intervals that certainly not exceeding 10 years. So are you willing to make that investment now for something that you may use in 10 years' time? So but it's, you can sort of kick it around and weigh up the options and arrive, hopefully, at a solution that works for everyone.
This has knock-on effects on maintenance, which inevitably deals with sustainability. I'm wondering, Lynn, on the client side, are you seeing a changing attitude about how maintenance relates to sustainability of your buildings?
Sustainability from a sort of environmental perspective?
Yes, yeah.
No, not a particular link. They're both important. What exactly are you thinking?
I'm just thinking in terms of sort of longevity of your building. I know Clearline highlighted the need to inspect your facade. If you can't access it to maintain it, it degrades and fails earlier. So there's a potential for increased longevity with improved access. The easier the access, the easier the maintenance, the longer it lasts, at least in theory. I don't know if that's a I guess it might be a driving factor.
It's not a specific thing that we look at, but probably because it's not been brought to us as a topic. We're always keen to hear from the design team new ideas and things people are looking at. Often we're quite driven by planning and the requirements for facades and what they look like aesthetically. That drives quite a lot of decisions. As well as sustainability considerations.
Anyone else?
I mean, speaking to some guys out in industry, it seems there's, compared to 10, 15 years ago, there's a slight growing recognition that if you maintain your facade, longevity increases, life cycle cost goes down. How much, I don't know. But like in simple terms, look after your facade and you de-risk it and save money. I mean, that's the trend, but it's not massive. But I think it has slightly improved. But there's some growing recognition with some clients, and obviously some don't at all.
Yeah.
So I could throw in a couple of examples of that. Some work that we've been doing at WSP. One of my colleagues, David Walker, has been doing down at the cheese grater, where they've had moulds and significant growths appearing on the gaskets and taking hold and growing and pushing the gaskets out and creating leaks. That's been happening on the rear of the building where they've got the chiller units, and it creates obviously this warm environment for things to grow. That's caused a lot of problems on that particular building. I mean, they've got pretty decent facade access systems, quite complicated as you can imagine because of the shape of the building, but they have got systems that can put hands on the facade, so it helps. And I worked on a project as a contractor and Broadgate Tower, which is just behind Liverpool Street, actually very near to where the Clear Line guys were looking at earlier, just off Primrose Street. It's got sort of stainless steel cladding detail on there, and they were getting corrosion on the cladding, albeit stainless steel. They were getting corrosion, and obviously they were able to deal with that to a certain extent with the BMU systems, because they had the BMU systems. They had the ability to put hands on facades on the facade. They did retrospectively put a second BMU up there, which of course was a lot of work, because the first BMU of course went up with the tower crane, the second BMU up with a mobile crane. Because but the reason for the second BMU is because this corrosion that they were getting on the stainless steel, and it's very much, if you imagine, again, One Canada Square, the stainless steel is very much a feature of the building. So they just found that they just couldn't get round quick enough with the one BMU, so they retrospectively put a second BMU up. But at least it allowed them to get on top of that situation. Probably not an ideal situation. I don't know in terms of the outcome what the comeback was with the facade supplier, and if any particular claims against the material. I don't know, but it was something at least they were able to deal with. And probably the last one, actually, tying in a little bit with Will, is the project I worked on, BP3 in Canary Wharf, where they had failure in the stone. And water was getting inside the stone, and stone was exploding and falling from the building. And this is, if you're coming from the east into Canary Wharf, it's just on the sort of eastern gateway as you come in near Billingsgate. And ultimately, they replaced all of the outside stone with the BMU. Wasn't in the intention, of course. Never imagined they would have done that. But they found there was an inherent fault in the stone, which couldn't be fixed, so they had to remove the whole stone. That happened over a 3-year period, and just systematically replacing those stones one at a time. So they're quite extreme examples, obviously. Ordinarily, you'd expect the VMU to be
They're working the way they intended, at
window
least.
cleaning.
Good.
So.
Or needing a second one, I suppose. I think that's it for our time, unfortunately. We managed to chew through that fairly quickly. I don't know if there's any questions from the audience for the panel? Oh, yep, we've got one here at the front. Oh, Surveyor's guy's on mic.
And I got a microphone. Do clients listen to your advice? Apart, present excluded, obviously, they're
Yeah.
brilliant.
Yeah,
As in, for every single one of you, really. And Lee,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear from you as well.
Well, for me personally, I would say mostly yes. It absolutely does depend. I mean, there's certain clients, there's certain projects where you know pretty much from the outset whether they're going to listen to you or not. So there's, you know, you've got your sort of top tier contractors and developers. Generally, you know, they listen. But further down the food chain, maybe not so much. It's a more difficult sell.
I'm lucky to work with good clients, yes, and they do listen.
Yeah, I mean, if I can get on board early enough. Normally, at stage 4, if our proposal is specification compliant, has been confirmed by the consultant specification compliant, then they're happy.
Lee, what's your view? I don't know how you're going to frame the response because you are a client. But
Me?
how do you
Do
feel?
I think I
How do you
listen?
feel?
Yeah, do you listen?
My husband says I don't listen, but I just don't listen to him saying that, so it's fine. I think we listen. I think we've got a lot of things that we're dealing with that people don't always see. You know, in the contracting team, won't necessarily see all the challenges. But yeah, I think it's probably what the team was saying about. I'd say probably more the bigger clients, bigger contractors. It's probably easier for us to listen, maybe than some of the smaller ones. But yeah, I think we do.
Thank you.
I think just to sort of save myself there, I think also a bit of pushback is healthy as well. So, you know, I don't think that's a problem.
That's a very
I have a question. Should we or do we need to consider long-term asset cost and value management in the process early on? Because I think we're hearing all sorts of things like we should be doing things early engagement with the consultants and the contractors, and do the conscious design, integrate the design with the safe methods of access of facade. But do we ever consider the long-term maintenance and the sustainability impact on the building of, considering some of the machines which needs periodic maintenance, and it only adds to the value of the asset. It does not degrade the asset, and if we consider them early in the process, would that be beneficial? And not just look at the cost of the machinery and the operational cost, but then overall long-term asset value management.
You talk about the operational cost and maintenance cost?
As well as the value of the asset you're maintaining.
I mean,
because your building will appreciate value over time.
I mean, I work in a team where we just look at capital cost, but I think the client, you guys sometimes employ FM guys who price.
Well, we do all our own.
Which we don't really
FM.
see sometimes, so it's probably there's sometimes you're the guy you employ, and it seems there's sometimes no communication, because sometimes I have also the question, how does it work out? What's the actual operational cost? Have we thought it through?
So it will depend whether your client does their own FM or not. We do, so we have quite a good process of soft landing, so that the team who are going to be running the building get involved before we finish. In fact, they're involved from very early on, and they do reviews of the design and give us feedback. And some things we try and incorporate everything, but there's always the odd thing you can't. But our teams are involved really early. But if you're a developer who maybe is not intending to hold on to the building, or you're procuring your FM team later, then maybe not so much so. But I think it's just depends a bit on how things are done.
Different setup, yeah.
But some of the funding is done through service charge, which I think is probably one of the challenges, is what can you service charge and what can't you, and factoring all of that in. But we definitely do operational costs, and that's factored into decisions on CapEx.
So you touched on it slightly earlier, but I think there was a bit more to expand on there, that when you... do you think that the building safety regulator is going to take an interest in collective safety measures like the BMUs, and actually sort of start to comment on that more and put that as whole points if you haven't fully explored it. I know he's sat there.
Look down in the corner. Sorry.
I mean, I've had some involvement on a couple of projects where we've been appointed early to support the Gateway 2 design, and they are collective protection in those instances, but I've not been involved enough really within the Gateway process to comment. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my guess is that the clients would want to play safe and don't second guess what the reviewers will say. So I think I'm just thinking you want to go the safer option rather than what you really want. But that's just my guess.
Did we want to comment or no?
I think we kind of run out of time.
No, all right, fair enough. Yes, I do see the clock blinking at me. So yes, thank you very much for your time and discussion, and